Hey guys, it is Kayla and Adam again with Tactical Response. I enjoyed our podcast so much last week that I was like, hey, come back. That was fun. Little bit, like we had some issues with the camera last week. So if you hear an alarm go off, that's just going to be our signal to quick sponsorship talk. And then we'll get back to the real talk.
We're just working to hack through camera
Yeah,
limitations. I think we're good.
Yep. So the theme of today's podcast is why be scared when you can be prepared. And the first thing that I wanted to talk about was the whole bank issues. I know that that's been on a lot of people's mind, seeing all of this stuff that looks really, really scary.
Well, it is pretty scary.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of unknowns there, and there's still shoes to drop. So yeah, I think given that, people should not necessarily be scared, but should be prepared for it. And it's interesting that the way that it's spun into this, from what I've read, and I'm curious to like what you've seen in the media. A lot of people are pointing at cryptocurrency and Bitcoin as which may be partially true for Silvergate, fundamentally not true for Silicon Valley Bank, and certainly not true for Signature. Those are three of the large banks that have collapsed and or required a bailout. And then overseas, things like Credit Suisse needing, I think it was 50 billion euro an injection from the government there. So these are real problems. So yeah, it's pretty concerning. So
what are some of your recommendations with it? Because I know that you're really big into like the finance world.
A little bit, yeah.
Like,
yeah.
So, comparatively speaking, you're really big into the finance world.
Sure. So first of all, I'll caveat all of this and say nothing I'm about to say throughout this podcast should be considered financial advice. Not qualified to give financial advice. The reality, I think, is we're in a very precarious situation from not only a national economic perspective, but also a more macro global perspective as well. We're in a position where inflation is up. Potentially there are things happening, especially with the BRICS countries, most recently, to minimize the use of a dollar on a global scale. With inflation being up, it seems that the consumer spending is still increasing. However, consumer confidence is decreasing, sentiment is decreasing. It's very complicated. And there's a lot of things that go into like actually how the global markets function. But I think more on like an individual perspective, the estimates I've seen are just like Signature, Silvergate, and SVB, Silicon Valley Bank. There's somewhere between 30 and 100 other banks that have this same problem. We'll talk about what that problem seems to have been. And the solution for that, the money, the injection of capital that would be needed to solve that at that scale is somewhere between 50 billion and a couple $1 trillion. And no one really knows how this ultimately unfolds. And I think behind the scenes, this is still unfolding. It's no longer on the front page of the news today, but there is still a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes. And really kind of what it comes down to is, and we won't get like super technical into the finance nerd side of it, but it really comes down to how certain assets, specifically certain treasury assets, are marked to current, marked to the current price, and how banks may account for them in the event that those assets, they've not realized an actual loss for those assets. And that it almost creates I'm trying to think what like an individual equivalent would be. Let's say you buy a tank of gas at $5 a gallon. A week goes by, you don't use any of that gas. Gas is now $4 a gallon. So if you wanted to sell the gas that's in your car, you're not going to sell it at $5 a gallon.
Right. I'd lose $18 because I have an 18-gallon tank.
Fair. So I have a 31-gallon tank. So I'd lose more. But if you were a bank, you don't have to report that $18 loss until you sell it. So you could have assets on your books that are worth more than they are to the market as it exists today. And you're basically accounting for those assets, not as a loss, but essentially at what you paid for them, which may not be an accurate representation of the market today. And you can see when you do this at, hundreds of millions of dollar scale, those numbers can get really big really fast. And in the event that if you're a bank, for example, and people start to withdraw money, because that was this other big thing around a bank run, people start to withdraw money, you might not have enough money to cover those withdrawals. You have assets that are tied up in 10-year treasury notes. You have assets that are tied up that you've lent out in mortgages for other people. So it becomes very complicated. And essentially that's what happened with Silicon Valley Bank. And now they're fully backstopped by the government, which is concerning. The
government will just print the money for them.
Well, then inflation will go up more.
Oh, like we said it would do before they did it during COVID?
Absolutely. Right. So, but this is the problem. The government needs to print money to solve these issues. I think if we put a medical spin on it, we're treating the symptoms, not the disease.
Oh, for sure.
Like that's
100%.
Yeah, and we've been doing that certainly since 2008. Probably for the last, 40 or 50 years. So we're in a cycle now where, again, I used the term grim when we spoke last week. Things look pretty grim.
They do.
And that kind of now comes full circle to what should people do? Well, I think for this audience, anyone that's going to be watching this, with the exception of maybe some federal agents that are required to watch this and then write a report about it.
Right.
I'm sure there's at least one. There's definitely at least one.
We probably both have our own.
Yeah,
if we're being real talk here,
that might be very true.
Yeah. Both have our own.
Yeah, that might be very true. They compare notes afterwards. So I think that it comes down to, and this is where I take comfort personally, is it's not too dissimilar from all of the other things that we talk about, right? Have a plan. Make sure that you're not overextended in your credit cards. Make sure that you have a bit of self-reliance, a bit of ability to survive. What I always tell people, and again, not financial advice, but when personal friends ask me, well, what should I do? What's the order of priorities here? Well, first is get out of credit card debt, full stop, have to do that. The second is work towards having a year of your salary or your wages saved. If you can do those two things, you become a much more resilient individual.
And to that point, it doesn't necessarily have to just be cash. If you
Correct.
can spend extra money and get your groceries, that is and I don't even want to say out loud what our grocery budget is a month. I've got a family of 5 and my kids eat like a football team.
Hey, I eat 4,000 calories a day.
Right, okay. So yours is probably similar. But say we'll say a grand a month.
Sure.
Easy.
Yeah.
$1,000 a month on food right now. If I had bought today's month or this month's worth of food last year, it would have been $700.
Yeah.
So that it goes to okay, now I can take this much off of my budget that I need cash in the bank for.
Yeah.
So because a lot of people are just even if you are on any kind of government assistance, you still get food stamps, you can store food, you can stock food, you can do things that are going to make life better for you when this happens, because it's not an if at this point.
There was somebody at 2 or 3, I don't remember how many self-reliance festivals ago it was. It was the second one they ever did. And I won't say her name because I didn't let her know that. I didn't think of, I would want to let her know beforehand. But she had talked about, her family came onto hard times a few years back, and it was because they had such a deep pantry and they had planned to have enough food on hand. And I think that's really important. I think very germane to this audience is preparations. And an emergency doesn't necessarily mean the zombies are coming.
Right.
It could be mom and dad lost their jobs. We need to really tighten our belts. And, we need to still feed everyone, and we're going to do it on a budget. So we're going to supplement our grocery bill by using some of our stored food. That might be, that's probably going to irritate someone who's no, that's only for when the zombies come.
Except the chances of a zombie apocalypse happening, they're never zero. So
Sure.
Don't hear that. They're never zero. But they are much less likely than what is going to happen, and it's going to be that the United States enters another depression.
I mean, we could argue
that we're already there.
Well, again, wages are so high, employment is so high, like unemployment is so low.
Mm-hmm.
It's really complicated. I would say that I haven't looked in a while. It's been a couple of weeks, but I believe we've met 4 of the 5 criteria required to declare a recession. We haven't met the 5th one. So
have we not met it, or have we not admitted that we've met it?
Well, you could also look and say, well, how have we metriced those particular categories, and how's that changed over a generation or two? With inflation at, you said $700 to $1,000 on groceries, like last year versus this year. That's 30%, right? Mm-hmm. So inflation's probably not 11% or 9% or whatever we're like alleging it to be. It's probably a lot more.
Oh, my bills tell me that it's a lot more.
I'm with you. I bought tires for a vehicle in 2020, and they were $170 a tire. Recently bought them; they were $350.
Yeah,
things are getting more expensive. I think the reality is that's the world that we live in today. And I've been saying there's probably no recordings of it, but there are people that will agree that I've said this going back to probably 2007. Around what we're seeing unfold today with organizations and countries like OPEC being an organization, countries being Russia and China, for example, mobilizing to remove the dollar as the global reserve currency. Mm-hmm. Once that happens, everyone in America, mostly, maybe not everyone, a lot of people like to talk about fairness. Well, things have to be fair. What most people don't realize is everything here in the United States is manipulated because trading globally, commodities at least, happens in the dollar, right? Like that is it's the global reserve currency, right? Mm-hmm. So if that ceases to exist and we move towards a hybrid of a Chinese, Russia, Saudi dollar, a basket of currencies is the term they're using. Whatever that looks like, things will get really fair here. And
I don't think that word means what they think it means.
No, I don't think they do either. Things will get really, at a global scale, things will get really fair here. And, gas being $6 a gallon like it was, 8 or 9 months ago will seem like a bargain. And that's not to like incite panic or be any type of rabble rouser, as my grandfather liked to used to say. That's just a reality. Like we accuse other countries of manipulating currency, but like we are like the masters of manipulating currencies. Right. So it's a concern. So again, coming back to, well, what should people do, right? There's obviously like the getting out of debt thing. Like you should not have credit card debt. I would say it's like impractical to not have a mortgage in most cases, but again, if that's possible, like that should be a goal. Interest rates for cars right now are ridiculous. Like probably shouldn't be buying a car right now unless you absolutely have to. And then the other aspect is like, think about Silicon Valley Bank. I won't go too much into it because not me personally, but I'm very close to some organizations that had significant exposure, like, 8-9 figure exposure to Silicon Valley Bank. Mm-hmm. And what happened there is, I think, a very interesting case study on, well, what happens if your bank decides that they're not going to allow withdrawals, right? You can have savings, but what if you just can't get your money out? So that gets into, well, more of like a prepping kind of mindset. Well, not just food, not just water, not just XYZ, but also, well, should you have, and I'm not saying anyone should, because I'm not one advocating to put money under your mattress, because house fires do happen, but should you have 90 days worth of spending money in a fireproof safe somewhere? Maybe.
And then that leads to something else that I was going to bring up later on in the conversation, but it's the perfect time now. The whole cashless society thing, because that's a common theme I'm seeing, where like now they're tracking your PayPal, they're tracking your Venmo, they're tracking your Cash App, they're tracking every single thing you do.
Yeah.
And like, I have been places like in the last 365 days that no longer accepted cash.
Yeah, I'd probably find new places to shop.
I did.
Yeah.
I did. But
and this is the thing, right? And like it's a scary topic. Think about COVID, right? Think about 2 weeks.
That's its own podcast.
Well, it 100% is. And like I ran, like I admit, like the first couple of weeks, I thought COVID was like legit. Like the first week or so.
Same.
Like I ran off to.
I stayed home for because I got sick, and I didn't know. I was just like, oh my God, is this it? Like unbeknownst to me, we had already had it. Like my kids and my husband all got it, and then I got it the following year. But like, we were like, oh crap, okay. Like it's scary. So I stayed home for 2 weeks, and then when the recommendations started coming out, quickly saw through the bullshit.
Yeah,
I was like, fuck this, I'm going back to normal life.
Yeah, I mean, I ran off to a cabin in West Virginia for like 3 months, and we were there for about a month, and we were like, well, this is actually kind of nice. We're just going to stay here for another couple months, and that's what we did. But yeah, so that's a whole nother topic of like the crazy psyop that happened there. So programmable money is very scary. And we talk about a term that I believe Snowden, and I'm not a fan of Snowden's by any measure, but a term that I think he coined, was the first time I heard it at least, was a turnkey totalitarian state. And he was using that to describe the kind of dragnet surveillance. And Snowden happened in, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I don't remember exactly. Even then, I don't think anyone was talking about where we are now about controlling how money could be spent. So if you think about COVID and you think, well, we only want people to buy 4 rolls of toilet paper, to use the most popular example. Well, you could go get your 4 rolls at Walmart, go over to Target, go over to Walgreens, right? And you could pick up 4 rolls here, here, and here.
Yep.
Well, what if like your card just only let you buy 4 rolls total? Like very, very interesting, like the way these things could unfold. So take it a step further. Now, PayPal, Venmo, and those are the same company, but Cash App, etc. Something we probably won't talk about on this is the Cash App co-founder who got stabbed in San Francisco recently. That was a very interesting topic of some conversations I've had recently. But we're not at full programmable money yet, but we're getting there. Yeah, no, it is absolutely as sure as in 2006 when you got a touch iPod, that a touch iPhone was coming. Like the progression of technology is not slowing. No. Absolutely. So we're not fully at programmable money yet, and that's what we really should be calling. Anytime you hear central bank digital currency, you hear digital dollar, what you should be saying is programmable money. And that to me changes the narrative a little bit.
Okay. So just in case, like that is one of the most important points to take away from this is when somebody uses that word, like the digital currency, the digital dollar, things like that, programmable money should pop into your brain every time you hear that word, because it is way more accurate about what we're talking about and would change some people's minds.
Yeah, so programmable money. So there's going to be over a time horizon. We don't know what that is. I would probably measure it in 1 to 3 years. We will see control starting to get put in place, and we already are to some degree. But imagine if a merchant bank, like let's just like go through a hypothetical here. Visa, MasterCard, and American Express decide you can no longer buy ammo or guns. Okay. So you're going to pay cash. Great. Then the next step is the merchant account at Bank of America, that Camden Gun Store. I don't think there's a Camden Gun Store, is there? Okay, perfect. Perfect. Camden Gun Store banks at says, well, we're going to only limit how much cash you can deposit because we want you to go cashless. Right. So now you start to like triangulate like how these things could get pretty interesting. And then take it a step further, right? Well, 15-minute cities and things like that. Well, you're only going to be allowed to buy so much gas per week because you shouldn't be driving that much because it's bad for your carbon footprint. So there's a time horizon where I think we will get there. Now, what happens in 2024 may slow that down. It's only going to slow it down. It's not going to stop it. Near term, though, we're in this kind of weird middle zone where you have all of these fintech, financial technology apps, PayPal, Venmo, et cetera, Cash App, et cetera, that are starting to implement their own draconian rules. And not just rules, but also monitoring. And it's pretty scary. Because like I think the thing that people have to keep in mind is look without being paranoid, right? Paranoia is bad. But without being paranoid, but with a healthy dose of skepticism, look around the corner. Like, they're doing this today. What could happen tomorrow? And I say specifically, like, the difference to me between skepticism and paranoia is logic. Like, I don't think they're going to do, I don't know, like, whatever the most paranoid thing is that could happen. I don't think that will happen. But I do think that they're going to start to crack down on civil liberties through the payments infrastructure. And I think we've already seen, and I haven't really heard anyone really talk about it yet, and it's really worrisome to me, is just with what's happened with Twitter and the FBI, we've already seen when the federal government cannot implement certain surveillance or controls or censorship because of freedom of speech and privacy and all these other things, the Constitution, they will just then ask a private company. Right? We have to remember that the Constitution protects you from the government, not you from private enterprise. So then they will ask private enterprise to basically violate your privacy or violate your freedom of speech. And we've seen that play out in real time. And now I think the next battlefield for that, and I hate to really even use that, the next proving ground for that will be in the payments infrastructure and how we move money.
Mm-hmm. And that means you have to start, like, not just a little bit self-reliant. You need to, like, if you don't know how to do something, get books that will show you how to do it. Yeah. Like, you're not going to have to, nobody's going to have time to learn everything. Yeah. But, like, books are your friend. Yeah. I was listening to Andy Frisella's podcast, and he said he did not know a single successful person that didn't read.
That's probably true.
And like, I get it. Like, not everybody wants to sit down with the book, but like, there are audiobooks, there are other things that you can do right now, but nothing will beat hard paper books, like in hand.
Can't be turned off.
Yeah. Cannot be turned off. Can't be taken away. Can't be edited. Yeah. Because that was something else that started happening during COVID was like, I had printed out an article and then 6 months later went back and it read different.
Sure. Or tweets were deleted
and then there were some I couldn't even find. So like the tactile sensation in your hand kind of books. Yeah. Like, start buying them on gardening, start buying them on raising animals, start buying them on medications and drug interactions and things like that. And I like, we all like to laugh at the whole herbal medicines and things like that. But if you don't have access to anything else, and sometimes that stuff works better.
I love me a good kombucha, right? Okay. No, and actually a big topic during the last contractor class was the Ranger Handbook. So there's tactics, there's kind of protocols in there. There's a lot of things in there. Homesteading, you mentioned gardening, animals, veterinarian medicine. If you have dogs or cats, like, you probably want similar books about how to treat them. So there's a lot. And then it's also make friends, right? This is only going to be on Liber TV and Spotify.
And Spotify.
Yeah. So most likely, if you're a Liber TV subscriber, you're an alumni of some flavor. So there's a pretty good community that you're already a part of, and you should be working to build that community and leverage it. You don't have to move to Tennessee, although that'd be great. Like, they are issuing new driver's licenses every day.
And we need more people who think like us.
Yeah, we do. absolutely. I moved to Tennessee. So
to pause some of the stuff going on at the state level right now, which entirely different podcast, but
it is.
Oof.
Yeah, I mean, I moved to Tennessee. Like, so I lived in, so I don't know how many years it was. I lived in New York for a while, 6 years, 7 years. Then I lived in DC before that, in like Virginia, DC metro area. And my whole plan was to escape those areas at some point. But it took a number of years, like over a decade, to get to a point where I could pull the ripcord. Mm-hmm. Tennessee was a logical place, not least of which was because there's no state income tax here. And it's a lot better weather than I think Florida and Nevada and Texas. But yeah, I think you kind of circling back to the whole self-reliance thing, like in kind of having a library, and there's a million books to read. Mm-hmm. There's some that you absolutely want to have in hard copy. And then there's others that you just want to read. And, I won't bore the audience with my reading list, but there's certainly some that you want to read.
Yeah. And back to like, if you already have something prepped, like my dad, when he was sick, he like told the family, hey guys, like his words were, hey guys, all the food and stuff, like all of the preps that we have, that is not just for the zombie apocalypse. That is when chicken gets to like $15 or $16 a pound. We're not far off from that.
No, I was at a grocery store in so I mentioned when we sat in here, I just came back from like a 4-day Jeep trip in the Ozarks with some friends. And I went to the grocery store to buy steaks because I was going to grill steaks like on our first night, like in the backcountry. And yes, they were bougie steaks, but they were $35 a pound. Mm-hmm. This is ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Absolutely ridiculous. Yeah, things are very expensive. Absolutely.
And like, I want to kind of touch on, because right now it's just like, oh crap, I'm too late to the game kind of thing. You're never too late to start. The 3 components that anyone needs when moving into self-reliance: beans, bullets, and Band-Aids. And those kind of represent broader things. Like the beans represent all the different foods. The reason that vegetarians eat rice and beans is because it takes both of them to give you a complete protein that you would get from an animal source. So knowing stuff like that, knowing what you have to do, like the whole bread and water thing, like prisoners used to live off bread and water, not the bread we eat today. That bread actually had nutrition behind it.
Well, that was also a punishment.
Yeah.
Like they didn't.
But now today you could not just feed somebody like white bread from the grocery store and water for that length of time and them not become malnutritious.
Well, and it's also performance, right? Like we'll just say whatever the crisis is, right? Chicken's $20 a pound, the zombies show up, society, whatever happens, you can't get your money out of the bank, whatever it is. During those periods, you're probably going to need to perform optimally. You're not going to do that foraging or eating bread and water. Like if I don't have like 3 cups of coffee, I get a headache, right? Like we've been conditioned to be fairly soft. And you have to think about that, as you're kind of going through, insulating yourself from catastrophe is probably how I would put it.
Yeah. And like, I've watched a bunch of different things on like the 80-year cycle.
The Tytler cycle?
The one where like, where we followed it like, hey, you're going to have this thing happen, then this thing happen, then this thing happen. And we're following the same like holding pattern that has spanned across like at least
multiple
the United States, like since our history. But even if you go back, like the Romans, like all of it, like, so this happening isn't like the end of like the United States. Look at it as, hey, we can change it and turn it into a new beginning. Like I'm trying to remember the video because it was like, this generation is going to be the one to save this one.
Okay. Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. And I
hope, that anything that's really catastrophic happens, and this sounds crazy, right? So bear with me, everyone, and don't cut this 10-second clip out and make a short of it. But I hope that whatever catastrophe happens for this 80 years, we'll just use that as a time horizon, happens soon.
So that we can get back to fixing it.
Well, that we can get back to fixing it, and also because I look around to my left and right, let's just say people that are somewhere between 25 and 45. There's certainly a lot of people that fit into that age range that you wouldn't want to help fix it. But we also have a very, we were at war for 20 years, right? We've had some interesting times in the global financial markets during the formation of that kind of that time frame of people. So I don't know that I would want the next generation to have to fix it.
It's supposed to be the millennial generation that makes
it's hard to admit that you're a millennial. At least it is for me.
Same. I'm like because I'm a latchkey kid millennial.
Yeah, sure, same. Yeah,
that's totally different than like the newer millennials. Like if I told people that I let my kids get off the bus at the house and just like go inside and wait for me to get home from work, which I don't because now I would go to jail for that. But that was my childhood. Both my parents worked. Like we were latchkey kids.
I grew up in the Southwest and I had the opportunity numerous times throughout summers as a kid to go to a friend of our family's, and they had a big piece of land. And we would ride like four-wheelers around the desert, like the desert. For hours on end and like disappear. It was like you'd go to jail for like letting your kids like have pocket knives and 22s and ride four-wheelers at like 12 years old around the desert.
Yeah. Like I left. It was one night in the evening. Our washer and dryer were both messed up, and we hadn't had time to go to the laundromat yet. Like, and I've replaced it now, but it was like, hey, it just went out today. It was laundry day. And Gatlin had wet through his last outfit. So I ran to the store, and it was like 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. So I had the push to start. So I locked the kids in the car with the air conditioner going, was like inside for less than 2 minutes. And a lady had called the police on me. I'm like, my kid's 8.
Yeah. I mean,
like I left my cell phone in the car. He knows how to call 911. She's like, they're scared. I'm like, yeah, bitch, of you. You're banging on the window. Are you okay? Like, yeah, they're scared of you. I'm sorry. I raised my kids to be more independent.
Yeah.
And
I have a Post-it note.
Yeah.
For Hudson. It's like the AC is on. My dad is monitoring me. Don't worry. And I put that on the window because I'll do the same thing.
Yeah.
Like I'll leave him in the truck, auto start it, AC's on, music's on. He's he's listening to, Sirius XM and just chilling. I'll run in like 5 minutes, like run in and get something. I've never had anyone freak out, but I have a little Post-it note that I put on the window that's like, don't worry, he's fine. Like,
see, this is like a emergency situation.
Yeah.
Like, run in to get like clothes for him to wear that night. It wasn't like I needed to go in and, I need new foundation. Let me get that. Like, no, it was a need. We had, he needed clothes for that evening.
Yeah.
And I was like, what in the world? And I think, like, back to the last time when we talked, like, the strong times and weak times and weak people. And we have, I believe, and this, like, my tinfoil hat is running out of layers at this point, but I believe that it was an intentional thing to weaken society.
Yeah. Yeah.
Adam's like, my NSA agent might not be as nice as yours. I believe it was very intentional and that there was malicious intent behind it.
I think let's think about this through like some analytical lens. I think the only thing that a weakened America, weakened United States provides, well, the only let's say the only governments that it helps is Russia and China, and then like their series of actors, right? So like, whether it's like North Korea or Syria, Iran, or what have you. But a weakened United States helps Russia and China, and really doesn't help anyone else. And well, then you ask yourself, okay, if we agree to that, then we ask ourselves, well, how did we get, like, has there been a concerted effort to weaken the United States? There's plenty of things that we could point at and say, that's weak in the United States, that's weak in the United States, that's weak in the United States. We could even talk about gun control as potentially, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but let's hypothetically say China wanted to invade the United States. It would really help China if everyone was disarmed.
In World War II, Japan said that they would never invade American soil because there was a rifle for every blade of grass.
Yeah.
So the populace being armed is what deterred foreign invasion, not the military.
Yeah. And I mean, if it comes down to that, our military is going to
Wolverines!
I mean, if it comes down to that, right, and we can apply a certain amount of like game theory to this, like if it comes down to that, the United States military will be preoccupied externally, right? There will be fighting a multi-front war through multiple domains to include likely, for sure, cyber, likely space. It'll be a very, very complicated battle if there does ultimately become, if I would say if China enters the fray with Russia, there's a lot of, in a more kinetic way, we'll say, there's a lot of weird stuff that could start to unfold. And this gets back into, reliance upon oneself. I think it's one of those things where you can very quickly overdo it or go down the wrong path and overdo it. But I think some of the things that we've talked about around, it's probably good to have some food stored. Like, that's not new to anyone who's listening to this.
Even the government says that now.
Well, yeah. After Hurricane Katrina, right, it was like everyone should have 10 days of food and water, I think is what Homeland Security put out, or FEMA put out. But we're in a time where things aren't getting easier. It doesn't seem. It seems that the United States is getting weaker. And this isn't something that I would even say. I'm sure there are some people on here that, like, when I just said that, will say, yeah, ever since Biden got elected. Like, no, like we could probably say for several decades now.
Yeah.
There has been a downhill trajectory.
It was actually Bill Clinton.
And I don't know if that's actually true. I was actually just in driving through Arkansas, and there was some like Bill Clinton signage of different things.
Oh God.
Well, it was Hot Springs. I was in Hot Springs, and it said the I guess that's where Bill Clinton was raised. They claim that fame quite a bit.
We love the guys in Hot Spring. Like, we got J-Law down there, and Ledbetter. Got a bunch of them down there.
Yeah, no, it's a good crew. I've had the chance of doing some fighting rifle classes with those guys.
Awesome.
They're good guys.
Yeah. I think it started before that. I fully believe that who am I to argue with, like, so many years previous of cycles? So
Well, yeah, I mean, we could. It's interesting, like the whole Russia-Ukraine thing is super interesting because I think it ties a lot into like a weaker United States. I don't know really the decision-making logic behind the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Afghanistan made a lot more sense, and this will all come full circle because you're looking at me like I'm crazy. But
that's just my face.
But we spent a lot of money and time focused in those two countries. And I have my own opinions on good, bad, otherwise. But we bled a lot of money. And it seems like now we didn't learn from us essentially causing the Soviet Union, when they were fighting the Taliban, basically we caused them to bleed a lot of money. And now Russia's entered Ukraine, and now Russia's having to bleed a lot of money, and people for that matter. So it seems like we don't really learn these lessons. And you look at that, and then you look at possibly a lot of propaganda, possibly a lot of manipulation of social media and the media and the broader media. You look at some other things that have happened. We've talked about bread, like what's in our food, what are we eating, all sorts of things. It does seem from a casual observer's perspective, it does seem that there has been a concerted effort over a handful of decades to weaken the United States, which again only helps Russia and China and then their kind of surrogates.
And I think that's a big problem, like with our own government, is they're not looking at the long game. They're looking at the short game, like what this is what I want, and not looking at all of the repercussions that come from getting what you want. Like sometimes the best prayers are the ones that are left unanswered, like that kind of sentiment.
Well, I think we have, and again, maybe this ties into the effort of an external party to cause this, but it seems, again, not being in those rooms, not really knowing what's being talked about behind closed doors, it would seem to me that Congress, the executive branch, all of the executive branch agencies, we seem to be very focused inward. We seem to be very focused on, and the sad reality is we're focused inward, but yet we still don't really ever seem to solve any of our inward problems.
Right.
Like, I think, Biden messed this up and Trump messed this up initially, where like, infrastructure in this country is crumbling. It doesn't take a lot to drive around the country and see bridges that you're kind of worried about driving over. As soon as, and this doesn't play into the popular narrative, so it's difficult, but as soon as we realized that COVID was not as communicable as we thought it was, like everyone was still at home. Rather than printing $1 trillion and giving it away, we should have put out $1 trillion infrastructure package. Outdoor work, most blue collar guys that are doing that work and gals that are doing that work probably weren't too worried about COVID. And we could have spent 6 months revitalizing infrastructure across the country and putting people to work and not just paying them to stay home. So I think we all messed that up as a country.
But part of that was because people were getting the checks.
Sure.
They were saying no to open jobs.
Well, we should. I don't think we should have sent checks.
It doesn't change your point. As soon as people no, I don't have to go to work. I'm getting COVID money.
Yeah, I think giving people money was the wrong call. Possibly giving them
stipends for food.
Some food, sustenance, baby formula, diapers. Like there's certain things that money could have been spent on. Now, yes, that might contradict, kind of free market. People should get money, but it wasn't really their money. It was, taxpayer money. So it's a tricky situation, but I think we missed a lot of opportunities to solve some problems because, again, we seem to be very inward focused at a national level, at a federal level, but yet we get nothing done. We don't what is the last major kind of federal U.S. level thing that happened that everyone, both sides of the aisle, can say that was good? I don't remember what it was.
I don't either. I think the last time that I felt that the country was united and wasn't at each other's throats was on 9/11. Yeah. I don't remember a time since then that, and I'm not talking about 2 months after 9/11. I'm talking about on 9/11.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that it took a massive terrorist attack to cause that amount of unity. And again, this might tie back into things are so good here that we have to argue over all of this other stuff.
We are monkeys touching the alligator.
Yeah, I mean, eventually we're going to get bit. So, but while we're inwardly focused and while we're disagreeing on, let's say, non-existential problems, the rest of the world, specifically Russia and China and their surrogates, are actively mobilizing against us. And that, to me, when you layer in all of these other things we've talked about around a weaker America, things like that, should be very worrisome. And for lots of reasons, not least of which is Russia and China, and I by no means, I'm as pro-America as anyone, but by no means do I have rose-tinted lenses on.
I can love my country and despise my government concurrently.
Yeah, we do plenty. So what I'm about to say is like
Concurrently.
we've had plenty of issues in this country, and we still do. But Russia and China mobilizing the way that they have, one could cause, depending upon what happens with the financial markets, a reality here that is very fair. And we've talked about this a second ago. Not something anyone wants. No one wants to pay $15 for a gallon of milk, or $10 for a gallon of gas. The other thing is those two countries like really don't have the best human rights like records, right? And
they don't.
I mean, it was really funny. I said this when right around the time, I mean, this wasn't funny, like the fact that Russia invaded Ukraine, but right around that time, Russia invaded Ukraine and everyone's up in an uproar. And I was talking to some friends that are maybe on like a different end of like the political spectrum. And I said, it's funny, like I'm old enough to remember like 6 months ago when being a communist was cool. And like everybody wanted to like that was a very trendy thing. I was like, so what happened? And I get that Russia today is not the USSR. I get it, but it's like it's interesting to see how everyone shifts. And yeah, I think the world at large is not better off with a stronger Russia and China, a more aligned Russia and China, and a weaker United States. That calculus to me doesn't work.
No, not at all. And I hate that it always comes back to this point, but with everything else that's going on right now, you should be doing everything in your power to protect your Second Amendment rights.
Yeah.
Like, that is the stick. Like, that is the thing that prevents anything else from being able to be forced on you.
Yeah, I would say it's I don't know if I would use the word stick. I would use the word, it's a deterrent. And the reason I wouldn't use stick is because as pro 2A as I am, and I do wonder if the broader American people, let's just say the broader subculture that is the Second Amendment kind of guns, or those types of folks, our type of folks, where is that line, right? Like at what point does the flag go up? And I don't know that anyone really agrees on that. And I don't know that the vast majority of people have the fortitude to actually have that as the stick. And I'm not saying they should. I'm not advocating for that.
3%.
Yeah.
Revolutionary War.
Yeah,
3%.
that's the number. That's the number that we always talk about. But it'll be, I hope it never comes to that. And I would forecast that it probably won't come to that. I would see, before it came to citizens having to, like individual civilians having to form militias and do things, my guess would be, just like thinking about like purely from a historical perspective, certain states would pull back National Guard or like State Guard, National Guard entities and reform them specifically to further that particular state's ideology. I think that would be like the first thing. And I think like if you look at this in like a series of like warning signs of like what to like look out for.
I meant like when I said the stick, like I meant if you don't have that,
sure,
then
it makes it a lot easier.
There is no way to, or there is not as an efficient way to keep bad things from happening. I pray we never have to do like anything. Like I would love for our government to pull their heads out of their ass and actually start doing what they're supposed to do. But one of those like people that, what if I get caught with it? Like that's
Sure.
the most common question my dad got all the time. Like, what if I get caught with my gun? He's like, okay, yeah. Nobody ever asked though, what if you get caught without it?
Yeah.
And it's one of those things like that wasn't me pushing for, hey, it's the time. That was me like, hey, having that, just having that option still available. So your word was better, deterrent, could prevent us ever having to do it. There's a reason they don't go door to door knocking and say, hey, give me what you got inside.
They've tried that like recently with some of the forced reset triggers. It's been interesting to watch on the sidelines. I never owned one, so it's been interesting. Everyone heard that I've never owned one. One of those forced never owned one. But
Adam's NSA agent.
Yeah, never owned one. But the it's actually funny. Like a good friend of mine who I've known for a while now is, lives in San Francisco, vegan, like total bought and sold on that lifestyle. Cool. I like it, whatever works for him. I sent him a meme a while back, and it was this minority with an AR-15 and holding a sign that said, "Armed minorities are harder to oppress." And I was like, this actually is pretty good.
I love it.
Yeah. So I sent it to him, and he was like, and some other things, he lives in San Francisco. Some other things have happened and transpired in his life. I've gotten at least one kind of urgent, late-ish call. He was concerned. Basically, his car that was parked on the street got broken into. The garage door clicker was stolen, as was the registration. So now they have his home address and the garage door clicker. So we worked through some hasty countermeasures to that. Basically, unplug the motor of the garage door, like pin it shut. They usually have those latches on it, etc. But now, as things have progressed, he's actually like, yeah, I'm really thinking I might get a gun. So my answer is always like, well, I don't even know if that's legal in San Francisco. I don't know what the laws are there. California's not a place that I try to go to.
Right.
But yeah, it is interesting to like see when things get real for people, regardless of what their ideology may be. There is oftentimes and there are some people that just totally don't have one, but a self-preservation like kind of mentality. And there are absolutely people that don't have that. But things are changing. It doesn't seem that things are getting safer. It doesn't seem that the financial markets are getting calmer. It doesn't seem that anything's getting cheaper. And it certainly does seem that there are organizations and governments, specifically Russia and China and OPEC, that are actively mobilizing to weaken the United States and to devalue the dollar. And when that happens, things will get really fair. And no one wants that. I'm assuring you.
I don't think that word means what they think it means.
It doesn't. Well, it's just a reality, right? Like we live in a bubble, and you can, for all of the problems of America, you can generally find gas and food and cheap food. It might not be the best food. I'm a big fan of those breakfast tacos that Love serves, the ones with the bacon, not the sausage. But yeah, you can find this stuff. We generally don't have a problem in this country finding, with some exceptions of certain cities, finding clean water. Like you can go to a hose tap at the outside.
We're calling you out, Detroit.
Yeah, there's definitely some orange tinted water around. But we generally don't have some of those major problems that other countries do. And as the U.S., as the global position and the dominance of the U.S., which I believe will happen, continues to dissipate across the world, we may start seeing some of those challenges. And that gets back into food preps, being prepared, medical preps, having the training, knowing how to use all this stuff. It's not just guns and ammo, for sure. For those,
beans, bullets, Band-Aids.
Yeah.
And you got to have shelter, like shelters.
Yeah. Well,
necessity.
For sure. And for those that don't know, like I'm sure there's at least one or two people that will watch this on Liber TV that I've trained with or had spoken with. Like I made a deliberate effort to extricate myself from major cities. So lived in DC for a while, lived in New York for a while, was doing stuff while I was there that made sense for me, that then set me up to be able to kind of take the next step, which was move elsewhere, buy a piece of land, buy or build a house, have, people talk about like a garden as like a raised bed. Like I have like a 2-acre piece of land that's like carved out as a garden, right? So doing things to allow you to have that layer of insulation from catastrophe. And that also includes the bullets and the guns and everything else everyone likes, but also includes food preps and also includes medical preps. Like I'm married
the not fun stuff.
I married a veterinarian for a reason, right? So yeah, like there are things in place. I hope she doesn't see that. She'll actually probably
The
laugh.
reason was because he loved her.
Absolutely.
Loves her very,
I do.
very much.
I do.
That was just a bonus.
But I also love Hudson, my dog.
So do I.
It comes full circle. So yeah, I think there's, you have to take deliberate steps in your life. None of this stuff will happen by accident. And it's harder for others than it is. And I get it. Like I lived in New York for a reason, and that was to get to a point professionally where I could, only have to Zoom during the day and not have to show up to an office. So there are steps though that need to be taken. And it's also like skills, like, cutting wood, running a chainsaw. Like your dad had talked about this. Like there are some people that think they can run a chainsaw, and then there are like actual lumberjacks.
Right.
And whether it's that, changing a tire. I was on a Jeep trip, like I mentioned, this past week for 4 days up in the Ozarks, and we had two of my buddies, and we had a 13-year-old boy and a 16-year-old girl. And hey, okay, we got one of the Jeep stuck. Everyone come over here, like really the kids. Yeah. This is how you attach a winch. This is how you safely winch a Jeep or a vehicle out of a mud pit, right? Like there are some basic skills that I think are more often found in the kind of more rural communities, but are important because I'm sure there are some folks that are living in cities, whether it's Knoxville or Nashville or Memphis or Louisville, that are going to watch this, and any other big city, that you still have to have those skills. Like what was when your dad was at the Bundy Ranch, it was be an asset, not a refugee,
right?
Or something like that. He said, yeah. And if something does happen, whether it's zombies, global financial collapse, food lines, whatever it is, like you need to be prepared to have all of your house in order, so that way you can be an asset to others and not a refugee if you have to flee. Yeah. So kind of coming full circle for like this whole discussion was like crazy things are happening, right? Whether it's like the global financial weirdness that's happening, right? Credit Suisse, and there's other banks. Like there's probably some zombie banks right now that are actually under, and I would say this probably, so like probably, I don't know for sure, some zombie banks that are just like coasting along, hoping that there's not a run on withdrawals. And if there were, they would be right there in line with the FDIC, hoping to get their check. Or their backstop. We're not calling it a bailout. It's a backstop. So I feel like we're in this like kind of like cruising, like we're coasting down this like road, hoping that no one throws a stick in our spokes of our bike, and that stick could very easily be a massive amount of withdrawals. I don't remember what all the numbers were because now it's like 3 or 4 weeks old news, and a lot's happened since then. But when people start withdrawing cash from banks, fractional reserve banking, the cash isn't there. So, thinking through all of that, it's really hard. I know for a fact, it's really hard for a lot of people to have not only savings, but then having a certain amount of savings that they can have in cash or liquid assets, whether that's dollars or whatever it might be. What I over-engineer everything. So I wouldn't even go down the path of, unless you want me to explain like how I think about it, because it would probably be way too overdone for anyone. Not like, cause it's like a lot of like, it's not like it's a lot of value, but just like covering lots of angles.
Yeah.
Like I'm the guy that like, we'll have a Verizon phone and an AT&T phone and maybe a T-Mobile SIM card. And then I have a Iridium in the glove box just in case the cell networks are down. Everyone thought I was crazy until the Christmas Day V-bid that went off in Nashville, and AT&T stopped working, and I had my Verizon phone, and I was like, this works. I'm going to text Jaeger and see if like what's going on in Camden. So yeah, like anyhow, we're kind of going around the circle on a lot of things, but having things in order, you got to get your own house in order. That's financially, that's the beans, that's the bullets, that's the band-aids, that's the things that you don't think you might need, like other skills besides shooting, besides medical, that would be very helpful. And then thinking through edge cases, like, should you have a couple cords of firewood? Like, maybe. Like, should you have some stored gas? Yeah, it's kind of a pain in the ass, to be entirely honest. Like, to store gas, it really is. Trust me, I do it. It's a pain in the ass because it goes bad. And like, I've got some cars that run on 93, some cars that run on 87. I've got like, other.
See, you bougie. I only got 87 cars.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I have a couple expensive hobbies. One is hanging out at TAC Response and shooting excessive amounts of ammo, and then the other is maybe a fast car. But and then you got diesel, right? Like the tractor runs on diesel, the pickup runs on diesel. So it's like storing gas is a pain in the ass. But if there was like a storing gas service, so if there's anyone in Middle Tennessee that wants to manage my fuel for me, I will pay you a reasonable amount of money to do that for me.
There you go.
But and it also, like, finding good help is hard. It's like impossible to find like folks to do like yard work and like move gravel and like, hang a fence. Impossible. But yeah, so having your house in order financially, beans, bullets, band-aids, super important. Having a network, having a community. You're not going to be Jason Bourne and out there, the lone wolf in it. You have to have a community of people. You have to, and whether that is a community of people that, will help you, that you can help them, that you would barter with, that you can learn from, leverage other skills. Actually, I got a text Tad, actually, that just reminded me. If you see this, Tad, text me. If I haven't texted you yet, I need something fixed. So you have to, have a community. Otherwise, you're not going to make it. And that is regardless of catastrophe. It's not just the zombie apocalypse, right? It is mom and dad lose their jobs, and now what? Mm-hmm. I guarantee there's somebody that will see this video that is hiring for something. That there's probably something, right? Like, so there's a network and a community, especially if you're part of like the TAC Response community, that you should tap into.
And that's kind of what I wanted to close out with is. People lived happy lives before the internet.
Yeah.
So, like, it is not out of the realm of possibilities that some kind of reset would actually be an improvement for quality of life.
I like the word reset. It's like, is that like the World Economic Forum, Great Reset?
Or just like after, when things get different.
Yeah, things get different.
If
things will get hard before they get better.
Right. If the right people step up and do what they need to do, I do think that it could work as, like, we have a reset with my kids. Like, if like everybody's on edge and like nobody's doing anything right, okay, reset. And then whatever punishments were issued, those get, like, everything goes back like nothing happened until somebody messes up again. And then like, okay, everything's on the table plus some. But I think that it's not outside the realm of possibilities. People lived that way for thousands of years. Preparation is the enemy of fear.
Sure. Yeah.
And if you, like, talking yourself into being okay with things now before you have to be is going to help. Finding a community. If you don't have one, we have one here at Tactical Response.
Yeah.
And it's a solid community. We hold ourselves to higher standards. Like, everywhere I've ever been in the country, I had somebody that I could call at 3:00 in the morning if something happened.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Start learning skills. Like, go talk to your great grandparents and ask them what you need to know. Like, that's the best advice that I can give you, is go talk to your great grandparents and ask them, like, hey, like, cause my papa, he was like, no, my mom, she cooked breakfast and then a cheesecloth went over the table until, like, the food was gone. Like, that was your meal until like it was gone, and then she'd cook fresh again. And like little tips and tricks from people who lived in times before everything was so easily accessible. And then again, the beans, bullets, and band-aids, guys. If you don't have any firearms, medical, or farming training, you should get some or become good friends with somebody who has some.
Yes, you should do that. And the radios, comms, like being able to contact your network.
You should reach out to Evan Dixon for the radio stuff.
I just had a Zoom call with him the other day. I couldn't come to this class here. I had something else going on that day. But
I got sick with the worst case of strep I've had since I was a kid and had to miss it.
That dude knows his stuff.
Yes.
I was very impressed. Yeah,
radio made easy, guys.
Yeah, I had a half-hour chat with him on Zoom the other day. It was very good. He's going to hook me up with some stuff. But yeah, I think the reality is you'll feel better. So there's maybe like an emotional crutch aspect to this by having certain minimal things in place. And then if you don't need them, okay. But if you do need them, you'll be glad you had them, right? It's like it's better to have and not need than need and not have. And I think that's a lot of what this boils down to.
Start small. Start with, okay, I want to store an extra 10 days supply of food.
Yeah.
Because they've done, like, there's been the studies and all this, like, things and, like, whatever, where, like, it's only going to, like, the big stuff. If we have some kind of invasion where we're, like, if you can make it a week, you're going to outlive a ton of people.
Well, yeah, there's a really good video on YouTube that talks about, like, who dies first.
Right.
I've played that video. It's an old video now. It's 12 years old, 10 years old. But I've played that for a number of people that are like that makes it click for them. And whether or not it's an invasion, which is obviously like
that's worst case. That's like zombie apocalypse.
Yeah, one end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Look, natural disaster. Like we just had a bunch of tornadoes rip through. Like one, which is south of here.
We had 11 warnings in Camden that night.
Yeah. And you talk about. We'll come back to that in a second. But you talk about like alumni and community. I had 2 different alumni text me and said, "Hey, saw there's some tornadoes in Camden. If you're going up there tonight or tomorrow morning, let me know and I'll go with you." Like, that's like wild. Yep. Right? Like that's not average run of the mill people. But yeah, so natural disasters. There's one just ripped through Little Rock. Like some people died. Earthquakes, mudslides, fires.
We had a flood in Waverly.
2 years ago.
2 years ago, that killed almost 30 people.
It's still not fixed.
And it's still not all fixed.
So these things happen, right? And it's you want to start small, like Kayla said. There's 10 days of food, 10 days of water. So a gallon of water per person per day in your household. Not that difficult. A gallon of bleach in case you need to like clean some water. Not a lot of money. You could do it fairly cheaply. Get off zero is what I would tell people. It's like getting into anything that is going to provide a dividend if you end up needing it, whether it's a retirement plan or it's preps or it's ammo. Like just get off zero, like buy a box of something, right? And I think that's really where you should start, and then you start layering in everything else, whether it's training and more elaborate preps, different tiers of preparations, and then think about like what are you worried about? I have a Jeep and I do a lot of Jeeping. So people are always like, I really want to buy a Jeep. I'm like, cool. What do you want to do with it? Like there's like 70 ways to build the Jeep. Like, what do you want to do with it? Same thing with preps. Like, well, what are you worried about? Like I've come to terms with the fact that like major grid outage, let's say a 6-month grid outage, like no power, like it's going to be a little Lord of the Flies. And there's no way I can have enough solar, enough propane, enough natural, like it's just your life is going to change. Yeah. So you do the things to like put yourself in a position to succeed, knowing that you can't solve every edge case. Right? Like tornado, certain things are going to happen. Like, so there's, massive EMP, whatever right. Solar flares, like whatever it is, like solve the things you can. And across all of those spectrums, being it bullets, beans, band-aids, like I keep a Iridium sat phone at my in-laws' house. They live an hour and a half away from me, because if the cell networks are down, I have a means now to communicate with them and figure out, is everyone safe? Should they come up to me? Should I go down to them? How do we slice this? So, it's just going to be start small, but then figure out what you're worried about.
Yeah.
Having lived through a few situations where cell networks go down, most recently in Nashville on Christmas Day when AT&T went down, that's something I worry about because it's happened. Clean water, Flint, like these things have happened.
Yep.
Train derailments with toxic chemicals leaching into the air. These things are happening. Right? Like food becoming more expensive. This is actively happening. So figure out kind of like what you're worried about. I would actually tell people that are just starting to prep or maybe like kind of in their first few months or year of prepping, like don't plan for the Chinese invasion, the EMP, or the nuclear war. No, don't plan for those things.
Plan for a tornado.
Yeah. Plan for something small.
Plan for a tornado.
Yeah. And then store, and I just said how much of a pain in the ass storing gas is, but have enough gas stored such that you can go from where you are to wherever you plan to go next, and like start there. It'll give you more peace of mind. I could not wait, and I had prep stored at storage units that would facilitate my departure from like New York or DC. So like I thought through a lot of this, but I could not wait to get out of the cities. Like I was like, even when I rented a place in Nashville for about a year before I ultimately found a piece of land to buy. And even in Nashville, I was like, oh, this sucks. Like traffic is horrible. People like everywhere, constrained resources. So yeah, like, I think you got to think through all of those things, obviously for jobs and kids and schools, like it's hard for certain people. But I will say what made me, speaking on getting out of the cities, this is what made me leave, going back to what I said, the whole COVID thing. When de Blasio, who was mayor of New York at the time, I was living in Manhattan, he had said, we're thinking about closing the bridges and tunnels into Manhattan. So I forget the population of Manhattan. I think it's like 7 million people. Somebody can fact check that. 7 million people on an island with like no toilet paper at this point. Yeah, that was like, okay, we're out. So mobilized the crew. I had a car, which was kind of an anomaly in New York City. I had another friend who had a car. Hey, 5:30 tomorrow morning, like basically we're out. And then we left, and it took us 3 months to get back. But it's having kind of that community, that network, that plan in place is important, because I never would in a million years would have thought a mayor of New York City was thinking about isolating Manhattan.
No, that only happens on Batman.
You'd only have, yeah. So there are things that my moral of that story is think about what you're worried about happening, but then be comfortable knowing that weird stuff's going to happen that you can't control and that you're not going to be able to plan for. You can't plan for everything. And like
dark humor is your friend.
Yeah. It's there's a guy I know who's done very, very well in life, and he's worried. His concern about doomsday prepping is climate change. Right? Like that's his concern. Like the oceans are going to rise, the sun's going to get too hot, like solar radiation is going to kill everything, gardening is going to be impossible.
What do his preps look like?
Well, and this is a problem, right? This is a 6-month ongoing conversation, and he's not gotten off zero.
Is there a way to get off zero if you think the sun is going to be too hot for Earth to be habitable
that's
place?
That's a whole nother hour podcast.
Yeah.
And I'm not an expert prepper. Don't get this twisted. Like I would have definitely, I'm not, there's people in this community that are far better at this than I am. But I just happen to know this guy, and he knows I'm kind of into this weird subculture. Mm-hmm. So he's but it's just but he's not gotten off zero. And he has.
When your aspirations are too big to start, you won't. Every single person, there's always going to be the outliers, but nearly everyone on here listening has had a day where they've had so much to do and still took a nap because it's so overwhelming that you're just like, man, so you have to take the second. And that's why, we were saying, start with prepping for a natural disaster, a tornado, an earthquake,
whatever's the thing in your area.
A hurricane. Start with those preps. Those are 3 to 10 days worth.
Yeah.
And when if
you're in a major city, a peaceful protest.
Yeah.
Election season's upon us. Plan for that.
Right. Those are things that when you start small, you can build on them. And how do you eat an elephant?
Yeah.
One bite at a time.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. And like,
So.
it's like same, and then starting with fighting pistol, right? It's like start with the building blocks, get off 0. Like the hardest thing, especially if you think about like how big the elephant is in this case, like bullets, beans, and Band-Aids is a cute saying for whomever came up with that. But it covers a lot of stuff.
It does.
Right? So try to get off 0 in multiple categories.
Yes. Get off 0 in at least like 2 out of the 3.
A couple, yeah. Well, like my strategy, my hack, and again, like not everybody is down with doing this or able to do this, but like I go to Walmart, which I despise going to Walmart. But I go to Walmart and I don't really like, I wouldn't, you're never done prepping.
Right.
It's a lifestyle. It's an ongoing thing. But even if I don't really like, there's nothing like on my real to get list. Like I'm like, okay, like I think I maybe get some more of this if it's on sale. Like just get like a few flats of like, get some oranges, canned oranges, some like collard greens, and some canned like beef stew or something.
Buy
like,
an extra pack of toilet paper.
Yeah, buy an extra pack of toilet paper. Buy 2 gallons of water. Like you can get the flats. I think there are 12 cans in a flat. They're like $1.50 a can. I get it. That can be a lot of money for some folks, but it gets you off 0.
If you can't buy the flat, buy the can.
Buy the can. Yeah, you don't have to buy the flat. Yeah.
Like if you can't buy the flat, buy the can. If you spent an extra $1.50 every time you went to the grocery store, like let's say you go once a week, at the end of the year, you have 52 cans of food. How many days is that?
Probably not many.
Like for my family, 52 cans. If we got soup and stuff like that, 3 to 10 days. Isn't that what we told people to start with? 3 to 10 days?
Yeah. Then you
throw a bag of rice in there and you've doubled it.
Yeah, bags of rice are pretty cheap still. If you can find them. If you can find them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm serious, guys. The enemy of fear is preparedness. You do not have to live in a constant state of paranoia. Just being off of 0 can help significantly with that.
Getting off of the X and getting off of the 0, I think, are 2 good strategies for life.
Insert dirty joke here about getting off.
I wasn't going to take anything in that direction.
A little bit of like levity at the end of it does, leave you guys with a smile. And with the advice to remember that your responsibility to be ready for the fight never ends.